The alien orphan had no hope, until a human changed everything. Nobody wanted to mate with the poor alien orphan, except the human who later found out the galactic bazaar of Trell. Station hummed with the cacophony of 1,000 alien species, bartering, arguing, and occasionally threatening each other with various appendages. Amidst this chaos, Drake Holloway moved with practiced ease, his mercenary armor gleaming under the artificial lights, his blonde hair slick back, and his light beard neatly trimmed. He cut an imposing figure, muscular, confident, and undeniably human. Drake wasn't here for the usual contraband or weapons that mercenaries typically sought. Instead, he made his way to a small, unassuming stall tucked away in the corner of the marketplace. Behind the counter stood Nira, a humanoid alien with emerald green skin that seemed to shimmer when she moved. Two thick leather-like tentacles protruded from her head, framing her delicate face, and shoulder-length silvery hair. Her black, tattered outfit with its aphid hood had seen better days, much like the stall she tended. Back again, human? She asked, her voice carrying a melodic lilt that always caught Drake off guard. Your kind usually are sticks to the weapons. Quarter. Drake leaned against the counter, offering a smile that had charmed beings across 3 star systems. What can I say? Your trinkets are more interesting than another plasma rifle. Nira's lips quirked upward, revealing teeth that were just a shade too sharp to be human. You say that every time, yet you never actually tell me what you do with all these trinkets. Professional secret, Drake replied, examining a small figurine car from what appeared to be bone. Hey, how much for this one? For you, 15 credits. Her eyes large and expressive with vertical pupils, who studied him carefully. Though I still don't understand why a human mercenary keeps coming back to my humble stall. Drake handed over the credits, his fingers briefly brushing against her green ones. Maybe I enjoy the company. A snort came from behind Nara as her employer, a bulbous alien named Gorth, waddled into view. Don't waste your time, human. Nobody wants to mate with the poor orphan girl, even her own kind abandoned her. He chuckled, the sound like rocks in a grinder. Worthless, that's what she is. Drake's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Nira spoke up. I need to restock the front display. Gorth, without waiting for permission, she slipped around the counter and motioned for Drake to follow her. Once they were out of earshot, Drake's expression softened. You shouldn't let him talk to you like that. Nara shrugged, arranging small artifacts on a shelf. He's not wrong. I am an orphan, and no one wants to tie their fate to mine. Her voice carried a resignation that made Drake's chest tighten. It's just the way things are. That doesn't make it right, Drake insisted, helping her place a particularly heavy item on the top shelf. Where I come from, everyone deserves respect. And where is that exactly? Nara asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. You've never told me much about yourself, despite visiting my stall for nearly a standard year. Drake hesitated, then smiled. Earth originally, but I haven't been back in a long time. The universe is too big to stay in one place. Must be nice, Nurse said wistfully, to go wherever you want. It has its moments, admitted, but it can get lonely. Their conversation was interrupted by Gore's bellowing voice. Girl, stop flirting with the customers and get back to work. Nira sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. I should go. Will you be back next cycle? Drake nodded, tucking the figurine into a pouch on his belt. Count on it. As he made his way back through the bustling marketplace, Drake couldn't shake the image of Nero's resigned expression. In a galaxy of wonders and horrors, it was the small injustices that sometimes hit the hardest. His commute buzzed, displaying a message from his ship's AI contract. Offer received, priority level high. Respond. Drake glanced back toward Nurse Stall, where she was now being berated by Gore for some perceived slight, except he said into the calm but scheduled departure. For after next market cycle, the eye's voice was smooth and emotionless. Unusual request. Delay may affect payment. Some things are worth more than credits. Drake replied, a plan already forming in his mind. As he boarded his ship, the small figurine seemed to weigh heavily in his pouch, a reminder of a green-skinned alien girl with silver hair and eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. The next market cycle arrived, and Drake returned to Trell Station as promised. This time he approached near a stall with a small box tucked securely in his pocket and a plan that had kept him awake during the journey back. You actually came back, Nara said, her emerald face lighting up as she spotted him weaving through the crowd. I told you I would, Drake replied, leaning against the counter with practiced ease. He noticed subtle changes in her appearance. Since his last visit, her silver hair seemed to shine brighter, and her green skin had a healthy glow that hadn't been there before. The tattered black outfit remained the same, but she carried herself with slightly more confidence. Gore said you wouldn't, she admitted, glancing over her shoulder to ensure her employer wasn't within earshot. He says humans never keep their word to aliens. Drake's jaw tightened. Gorth doesn't know about humans. Nira's eyes widened at his language. Then she broke into a soft laugh that made Drake's chest tighten in an unfamiliar but pleasant way. I'm beginning to think he doesn't know much about anything. Smart girl, Drake said with a wink. He glanced around the marketplace, noting the usual crowd of diverse alien species, haggling and browsing. When's your break? I was hoping we could talk somewhere quieter. Nero's tentacle-like appendages twitched slightly, a sign of curiosity. Drake had learned, I can take one now. Gore is meeting with suppliers for the next hour. She untied her apron and hung it beneath the counter. There's a small viewing deck on level 3 that's usually empty this time of day. Drake followed her through the winding corridors of the station, admiring how she navigated the chaotic marketplace with graceful ease. The viewing deck was indeed deserted, a small circular room with transparent walls that offered a breathtaking panorama of the surrounding star system. I come here sometimes when Gore gives me longer breaks, Nara explained, moving to stand before the vast expanse of space. It reminds me that there's more out there than just this station. Drake joined her, his shoulder nearly touching hers as they gazed at the distant stars. Have you ever thought about leaving, seeing some of those stars up close? Nara sighed, her breath fogging the transparent barrier momentarily. Every day. But where would I go? Who would take in an orphan Salarian with no skills beyond selling trinkets to passing travelers? I would, Drake said simply. Nara turned to him, her large eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. What Drake reached into his pocket and withdrew the small box he'd been carrying. I've been doing a lot of thinking since my last visit about you. About us, about this whole damn galaxy. Drake, what are you? He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring crafted from a rare metal that shifted colors like an aurora when it caught the light. Where I come from, we have this tradition. When we want to spend our lives with someone, Nero's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes widening and disbelief. But nobody wants to mate with the poor orphan girl, she whispered, echoing Gore's cruel words, especially not someone like you. You could have anyone. Drake took her hand gently in his. I don't want anyone, I want you, Nara. He met her gaze steadily. Everyone deserves love, even those who have been cast aside. Tears welled in NRA's eyes, spilling down her green cheeks and silvery tracks. You really chose me, she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. I did, Drake confirmed, slipping the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the metal warming to match her body temperature and settling into a swirling pattern of deep blues and purples against her emerald skin. Will you come with me? Leave this place behind? Instead of answering, Nara threw her arms around his neck, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that took Drake by surprise with its intensity. He responded, immediately wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her closer, savoring the sweet, slightly spicy taste that was uniquely hers when they finally broke apart both. Slightly breathless, N rested her forehead against his yes. She whispered 1,000 times. Yes, Drake grinned, feeling lighter than he had in years. Will leave. On the next transport cycle, my ship is docked in Bay 12. I just need to finish some business first, then we can what? About Gorth. Nara interrupted, sudden worry clouding her features. I'm contracted to him for another standard year. He won't let me go easily. Drake's expression hardened. Let me worry about Gorth. You just be ready to leave in 2 days. Pack light. Anything you need we can get elsewhere. Nara nodded, her fingers tracing the contours of the ring on her hand, as if to reassure herself it was real. I still can't believe this is happening, she murmured. It feels like a dream. It's real, Drake assured her, brushing a brand of silver hair from her face. And it's just the beginning. They spent the remainder of Nira's break making plans, their heads close together, as they spoke in hushed, excited tones. Drake explained about his ship, the Stellar Drift, and the crew that had become like family to him over the years. Nara shared her few precious possessions that she couldn't bear to leave behind, a small crystal that supposedly came from her home world, and a tattered hollow image of 2 Solarian who might have been her parents. When it was time for her to return to work, Drake walked her back to the stall, their fingers intertwined at the entrance to the marketplace. He pulled her close for one more kiss. 2 days. He reminded her, be ready. Nira nodded, her eyes shining with a happiness Drake had never seen in them before. I promise. As Drake made his way back to his ship, he couldn't help but smile. For a man who made his living in the dangerous fringes of civilized space, he'd never felt more certain of anything than he did about Nira. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. What he couldn't know was that his proposal had set in motion events that would uncover secrets long buried, and that the orphaned alien girl he'd fallen for was far more than she appeared to be. The morning after his proposal, Drake strode purposefully through the marketplace toward Gore's stall. He'd spent the night aboard the Stellar Drift, making preparations for their departure and informing his small crew about their soon-to-be passenger. Their reactions had ranged from curiosity to knowing smirks, but all had welcomed the news with the easy acceptance of people who live beyond the boundaries of conventional society. As Drake approached the stall, he spotted Gore, engaged in heated conversation with a tall, elegantly dressed alien whose species Drake didn't immediately recognize. The stranger's skin was pale blue, almost translucent, with intricate patterns that seemed to shift beneath the surface. When Gore noticed Drake, he abruptly ended the conversation, showed the stranger away with obvious nervousness. Human, Gore called out, his bulbous features arranging themselves into what passed for a welcoming expression. Early today, yes. Looking for something special? I'm looking for Nira, Drake replied, scanning the stall, but seeing no sign of her. Gore's false cheer evaporated. The girl is not available. Perhaps tomorrow. Drake's hand instinctively moved closer to his blaster. Where is she? Gore taking inventory in the back. Gore answered too quickly, very busy, cannot be disturbed. I'll wait, Drake said, leaning against the counter in a deliberately casual pose that nonetheless conveyed his intention to stay. Gore fidgeted, his skin changing to a sickly yellow hue. Perhaps we discuss business first. Yes, man to man. Drake raised an eyebrow. What business? I received offer for the girl, Gore said, lowering his voice. Very generous offer from very important people. She's not yours to sell. Drake growled, his casual demeanor vanishing. Gorth held up his hands placatingly. Not selling, no, just transferring contract. They pay her much better than I can. Very Good opportunity, whose they Drake demanded representatives of the Solarian. High Council came a smooth voice from behind him. Drake turned to find the blues-skinned stranger had returned now. Flanked by two imposing guards, whose species Drake recognized as Vulgarians known for their strength and loyalty, as bodyguards Counselor Thalion, the stranger introduced himself with a slight bow. I represent the interests of Solaria in this sector. Drake studied the alien carefully, noting the expensive cut of his clothing and the subtle insignia that marked him as a government official. Funny, I didn't know Solaria had any interest in this backwater station. Our interests are specific, Thalion replied, his eyes entirely black without visible pupils, affixing on Drake. The female Solarian, known as Nara, is of particular importance to us. She's important to me, too, Drake said evenly. And we're leaving tomorrow. Thalion's expression remained impassive. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Nara is not what she appears to be. She is, in fact, the sole surviving heir to House Vidian, one of our most prominent noble families. Drake felt as though the deck had shifted beneath his feet. What her parents were, Lord and Lady Vidian, ambassadors to the Galactic Alliance, Thalion continued. They were assassinated 15 standard years ago, and their infant daughter was believed to have perished with them. We recently received intelligence suggesting she survived and was living on this station. Drake's mind raced. Nara, a noble, and eyes, it seemed impossible, yet it would explain why a Solarian child had ended up abandoned on a remote trading post like Trell. If that's true now, why was she left here all these years? A Drake challenged politics. Thalion said simply, the assassination was part of a coup attempt. Only now has the political situation stabilized enough for us to safely retrieve her and her inheritance. Drake asked, suspicion clear in his voice. Thalion mouth curved in what might have been a smile. Substantial. The Vidian estate encompasses 3 planets and numerous holdings throughout the sector. She is quite possibly one of the wealthiest individuals in this quadrant. Drake felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. Would Nero believe he'd know nothing of this when he proposed? Would she think his timing was too convenient to be coincidence? I need to speak with her, Drake insisted. Of course, Thalion agreed smoothly. She's currently receiving a message from the High Council that will explain everything. I'm sure she'll have questions that only you can answer. The implied accusation wasn't lost on Drake. Before he could respond, a commotion from the back of the stall drew their attention. Nara emerged, her face pale, clutching a small data crystal in her trembling hand. Drake, she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. My parents, they weren't killed in an accident. They were murdered. Drake moved to her side, immediately placing a protective arm around her shoulders. I know, I just heard. Nara looked up at him, confusion mingling with the shock in her eyes. You knew? No, Drake said firmly, holding her gaze. I just found out from him. He nodded toward Thalion, who was watching their interaction with undisguised interest. Nero followed his gaze, noticing the Solarian official for the first time. Her tentacle appendages stiffened, a sign of alarm that Drake had learned to recognize. Who are you? She demanded. Thalion bowed again, more deeply, this time Counselor Thalion of the Solarian High Council, at your service, Lady Vidian. Don't not call me that, Nera said sharply. My name is Nara, as you wish, Thalion conceded, but it doesn't change who you are or what awaits you on Solaria. N's hand found Drake squeezing it tightly. What if I don't want to go to Solaria? What if I want to stay with Drake? Fan's expression hardened slightly. The human mercenary, my lady, surely you understand that your position requires certain standards. The Vidian legacy can go to hell, Nur interrupted, her voice stronger than Drake had ever heard it. I don't know anything about being a noble. I know about being alone. Being unwanted, until Drake she looked up at him, her eyes softening. He wanted me. When no one else did, Drake felt a surge of pride and affection, but before he could respond, Thyone spoke again, a touching sentiment the counselor said. His tone suggesting it was anything, but however, there is the matter of your safety to consider. Those responsible for your parents' deaths may still pose a threat. Is that a threat? Drake asked, his hand moving to his blaster Thalion. Guards tensed, but the counselor himself remained calm, merely a statement of fact. The political situation on Solaria remains delicate. Lady Viridian's return must be handled with utmost care. I'm not going anywhere without Drake, Nera stated firmly. That would be unprecedented, Thalion said, disapproval evident in his tone. So is finding an heir after 15 years, Drake pointed out. Seems like a day for breaking precedents. A tense silence fell over the group, broken only by Gore's nervous shuffling. Finally, Thalion inclined his in a gesture of reluctant acceptance. Very well, the human may accompany you to Solaria. The council will want to meet with both of you to discuss arrangements. We'll need time to prepare, Drake said, not entirely trusting the counselor's sudden acquiescence. Of course, my ship departs tomorrow at midday. I'll expect you both at Docking Bay 7 with another formal bow. Thalion and his guards departed, leaving Drake and Nera alone, with a visibly relieved Gorth. Well, Gore said, rubbing his hands together. Very exciting. Yes, little Nera, a great lady. Who would have thought? Get lost, Gore, Drake growled. The traitor needed no further encouragement, scurrying away to the far end of the stall. Once they were alone, Drake turned to Nera, taking both her hands in his. Are you okay? Nera shook her head, her silver hair swaying with the movement. I don't know, everything's happening so fast. Yesterday, I was nobody. And today, I'm supposedly this Lady Vidian. She looked down at the ring on her finger, then back up at Drake. Vulnerability clear in her eyes. Does this change things between us? Drake pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers in the intimate gesture they'd shared the day before. Not for me. I didn't fall in love with an Ares or a noble. I fell in love with you, Nera, the girl who sells trinkets and dreams of seeing the stars. I'm scared, she admitted softly. What if they're lying? What if it's a trap? Then we'll face it together, Drake promised. But first, I think we should have a proper goodbye to your old life here. That night, in the privacy of Drake's quarters aboard the Stellar Drift, they came together with a passion born of uncertainty and newfound hope. Their bodies, human and Solarian, found a harmony that transcended their biological differences. For Nera, it was a first experience of physical intimacy. For Drake, it was a revelation. Never had he felt so connected to another being. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay entwined in the ship's narrow bunk, Nara traced the scars on Drake's chest with gentle fingers. No matter what happens on Solaria, she whispered, this is real. We are real. Drake kissed her forehead, pulling her closer. Damn right we are. And in nobody, not counselors, not assassins, not the whole damn galaxy is going to change that. As Nera drifted to sleep in his arms, Drake remained awake, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. Whatever awaited them on Solaria, he would be ready. Thalion's ship, the Salarian Envoy, was a sleek diplomatic vessel that made Drake's mercenary cruiser looked like a rusted cargo hauler. As they boarded, Drake kept one hand near his blaster and the other firmly intertwined. With Nero's, his crew had been instructed to follow at a discreet distance, a contingency plan Drake hadn't shared with their Solarian hosts. Your quarters, Thalion announced, gesturing to an elegantly appointed cabin. Will reach Solaria in 3 standard days. One room, Nur asked, her tentacle appendages twitching with amusement. How progressive of you. Counselor Valiant's expression remained impassive. We assumed you would prefer to stay together. Given your attachment damn right, Drake muttered. Tossing their meager luggage onto the bed, there will be a formal dinner this evening, Thalion continued. Appropriate attire has been provided. With a curt nod, he left them alone. Once the door closed, Drake immediately swept the room for surveillance devices, finding 3, which he promptly disabled. Paranoid Nera asked, though her tone suggested she approved. Cautious Drake corrected, something doesn't add up. Why? Now, after 15 years, and why was Thalion so easily convinced to let me come along? Nero sat on the edge of the bed, fingering the fine fabric of the garment laid out for them. Perhaps they truly did just discover I was alive. Perhaps, Drake conceded, sitting beside her, but I've learned to trust my instincts, and right now they're screaming that we're walking into a trap. Nera leaned against him, her warmth of comfort in the sterile cabin. At least, we're walking into it together. Drake kissed the top of her head, inhaling the faint, sweet scent that was uniquely hers. Last night's intimacy had deepened their connection in ways he hadn't anticipated. The memory of her emerald skin against his, the way her tentacle appendages had curled in pleasure, sent a rush of heat through his body. If we're going to play their game, Drake said, forcing his mind back to the present danger, we need to learn the rules. Tell me everything you remember about Salaria. Almost nothing, N admitted, just fragments. A garden with purple flowers, someone singing a lullaby. I was only 3 when my parents died then. We'll need to be quick. Studies, Drake said, reaching for the formal attire, starting with dinner tonight. The dining room was a study in opulence, with gravity-defying crystal fixtures and a table crafted from what appeared to be a single piece of rare heartwood. 4 other Salarians joined them all, with the distinctive green skin and head tentacles of their species, though none possessed Nera's luminous quality. As introductions were made, Drake studied each face, carefully committing name and titles to memory. When they reached the final guest, a broad-shouldered Salarian with military bearing, Drake felt a jolt of recognition. Commander Rallick, the Salarian introduced himself with a slight bow head of the Vidian houseguard. Drake kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. Arvik, the name was burned into his memory from a mission gone wrong 5 years ago. Mission that had left 3 of Drake's team dead, and Drake himself with a scar that ran from shoulder to hip. Have we met before? Arvik asked, his vertical pupils narrowing slightly. I don't believe so, Drake lied smoothly. I'd remember dinner proceeded with elaborate formality. Drake watched as Nera navigated the complex Salarian dining customs with surprising ease, as though some deeply buried memory was guiding her. He followed her lead, aware of Rick's eyes, tracking his every move. Lady Vidian, one of the officials, addressed Nera. You must be curious about your inheritance. Nera set down her utensil with deliberate care. I'm more curious about my parents, about who killed them, and why. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. A tragic affair, Thalion finally said. Political extremists opposed to your father's progressive policies. Were they caught? Drake asked the immediate perpetrators. Were Rallick answered, his gaze locked on Drake, but we believe they were merely pawns of a larger conspiracy, a conspiracy that might still be active. Drake suggested. Rick's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. Precisely why? Lady Veridian's return must be handled with utmost discretion. The conversation shifted to safer topics, but the undercurrent of tension remained when dinner concluded. Drake and Nera returned to their quarters, both exhausted from maintaining their guard. Rallick is dangerous, Drake said once they were alone. I've encountered him before on Proxima 4. He was operating under a different name, but it's definitely him. Nero's eyes widen. What was he doing there, leading a group of mercenaries hired to eliminate a political dissident? Drake explained. My team was protecting the target. It went bad. We lost people. You think he was involved in my parents' deaths. I think it's one hell of a coincidence that he's now in charge of. Your security, Drake said grimly. Nara paced the room, her silver hair catching. The light with each turn, we need to be careful. If Arvik recognizes you, he...